Welcome back. Today we're diving into something a bit different, really quite unnerving actually. We're looking at a few real-life encounters taken from personal accounts shared online, and they all have this common thread: heavy rain and this deep, terrifying sense of isolation. These are moments where ordinary people were really pushed to their limits.
Yeah, and these aren't just, campfire stories. When you look at them together, they offer this really compelling psychological picture. They show how things like the environment, the rain muffling sounds, the dark messing with your vision, how that interacts with our basic human instincts. Our goal here is to get past the initial shock of the stories themselves and pull out the key lessons, about vulnerability, about being prepared, and how we think when we're under intense pressure.
That's a great way to frame it because the usual assumptions about safety just seem to evaporate in these situations. So let's start with the first one. This account feels maybe the most vulnerable to impression. It's about a child, maybe second or third grade, left home alone during a really bad storm. The parents were stranded somewhere else. The account says it was raining torrentially, like raining cats and dogs.
And you get that initial feeling of freedom, right? For the kid, anyway. Unlimited candy, no bedtime, classic kid fantasy. But the parents did give them a list, a sort of safety checklist.
Right, yeah. Lock the doors, close the blinds, keep a light on. Basic stuff. It gives the child this clear, kind of rational framework for security.
Exactly. But
then the story shifts. The child wakes up later, hours later, alone. It's dark now, and they notice something physically wrong. They know they followed the mom's list, windows shut, doors locked, but the house felt, and this is the quote, way colder than it should have. That's like the first little crack in their feeling of safety.
And that sensory shift is fascinating, isn't it? The cold, your rational brain might try to explain it away. Maybe the power flickered, the heating's off. But on a gut level, it registers as this sort of instinctual environmental alarm. It's like your body, separate from your conscious thought, is saying, hold on, the physical facts locked doors don't match the feeling this intense cold. It's like a pre-warning signal.
And while they're trying to sort of process this upstairs, the storm noise isn't actually covering everything up. They start hearing these weird creaking sounds like shifting wood. Yeah, the narrator is very clear. Their room, the hallway, it's all carpeted. You just don't get that kind of loud, stressed wood creak on carpet.
Right. It forces the mind to look for the source of the anomaly. The sound just doesn't belong. It's not the house settling. It's not the storm. It makes the dread climb. It's the sound of something moving when it shouldn't be.
Which leads to this absolutely terrifying moment of realization. The kid's lying there listening, tense. Then there's a huge flash of lightning outside, lighting up the bedroom for a second. Dark again. Then maybe a minute later, another flash. And that's when they see it.
The closet door.
Yeah, the closet door, which they were like 100% certain they had closed fully earlier. It was now slightly ajar.
And that's the physical proof, isn't it? The threat isn't just outside anymore. It's inside. It's in their room. And we have to acknowledge the kid's reaction here. It's pure instinct. Silently, they slide out of bed, creep downstairs, and hide under the dining room table. That's survival mode kicking in. Hide. Be quiet. Watch.
The way the intruder's movement is described is just chilling. It wasn't like normal footsteps. It sounded like whatever it was jumping and pinballing down the stairs, like uncontrolled, erratic movement. And then from under the table, the child sees the legs. Just the legs.
And describe
the two nasty, wet, and muddy legs that were tinted yellow and covered in cuts.
That yellow tint, the cuts, the mud, those specific sensory details sear into memory. It makes the horror very real, very visceral. And then comes the near-disaster moment.
Yeah, the intruder drops something. It hits the floor with a loud clatter. A wrench.
A wrench. Okay, so that escalates things immediately. It's not just someone creeping around. It's someone equipped for forced entry, maybe violence. It nearly breaks the child's resolve, that sound.
What really gets me about this story, though, is the aftermath, the long-term psychological impact. The child kept this entire incident a secret for years. Why?
Yeah.
Why carry that burden alone?
Well, it's a really profound psychological response, especially for someone so young. The narrator eventually revealed they were just consumed by this fear of disappointing their parents. They genuinely thought their parents would blame them for maybe not locking the doors properly or something like that. That fear actually overshadowed the terror of the intruder. And this fear of messing up, of disappointing authority, it led to this lasting, self-inflicted trauma, years of needing a nightlight, a deep-seated fear of the dark. The perceived failure to follow the rules was somehow harder to process than the actual home invasion itself.
Wow. That connection between the security failure and the psychological secrecy actually leads quite naturally into our second story. This one deals more with a kind of moral dilemma during a moment of isolated distress.
Right, we shift gears now. We're talking about a 15-year-old. This teenager apparently needed complete and total silence to sleep due to some medical issues. The heavy rain outside was keeping them awake, so they decide to do something that, on the surface, maybe sounds safe enough, but carries its own risks. They go for a late-night walk in what they describe as a very safe residential area.
So the paradox is they're trying to escape the noise inside their own home, this known environment. But to do that, they expose themselves to the randomness of the outside world, even in a safe neighborhood. They head into this well-lit park area, probably feeling secure because of the area's reputation.
And that's where they hit the conflict. They see someone, a person lying flat, face down in the middle of the street. Now, their survival instinct, that little voice inside, is apparently screaming, "Keep walking, don't get involved."
Not bad.
But their upbringing, that sort of ingrained moral need to help someone who might be hurt or in trouble, it wins out. They feel compelled to go closer, to check on the person.
That compulsion to help overrides the instinct for self-preservation. That's a tough spot. And just as they commit to approaching this figure, the whole environment seems to shift on them. The narrator mentions this really sudden, bizarre change. The rain, which had felt lukewarm, instantly turns ice cold.
There it is again, that environmental alarm signal. But this time, it's immediately followed by something deeply disturbing auditorily. From the nearby tree line, they hear this screech. It's described as a howl, but slightly off, like a wounded animal screech. It just shatters the reality of the scene.
So unsettling. Was the cold connected? Was the screech connected to the person on the ground, or just some awful coincidence? We don't get an answer, but the sequence is terrifying because right after that sound, the person lying in the street abruptly sits bolt upright, stares right at the narrator. Then they stand up and just sprint towards the teen, full tilt, with what's described as a demonic smile and holding a kitchen knife and yelling, "I'll kill you."
Whoa. The speed of that switch from potential victim to immediate lethal aggressor, that's pure terror. The threat is instant, it's unpredictable, and there's no apparent motive given, just pure menace. And what's really crucial here is the escape strategy. Think about this. The teenager doesn't run straight home, because that might lead the attacker right to their family.
Right. Instead, they bolt into the densest part of the nearby park, basically choosing to increase their own immediate risk, potentially, to protect the safety of their home. That's quick thinking under pressure.
Absolutely. But the question lingers, doesn't it?
Yeah, why? Why pretend to be injured like that? Why the instant murderous rage?
And that really gets to the heart of the psychological horror in this account. The narrator later just sort of guessed it was crazy people or maybe someone high on drugs. But that failure to find a rational motive, to understand the why, that creates what psychologists sometimes call existential dread. It leaves the survivor feeling like terrible things can just happen arbitrarily anywhere, anytime for no reason. It makes it really hard to find psychological closure. And that scrooch, whatever it was, just amplifies that feeling that the world itself suddenly turned hostile.
Okay, so from instinctual reactions and moral dilemmas, our journey takes us to our third account. This one shifts more towards prepared, almost tactical survival. Let's talk about Anisha. She's 29, and she was deliberately seeking extreme solitude. She went middle of nowhere camping in a remote part of Northern California, trying to clear her head after a breakup.
Right, so here, isolation is the goal. But right away, the environment throws up some red flags. When she gets there, she finds 2 trucks already parked near the trailhead, a gray one and a white one. Just seeing other people in a spot chosen for absolute solitude is the first sign that maybe her plan for isolation wasn't quite working out. Her initial safety calculation is already a bit off.
Yeah, a bit unsettling. But she decides to press on anyway. She sets up camp and later encounters 2 men who are fishing. One looked kind of rough, she says, and as soon as Anisha appears, the other guy quickly covers something up. When she asks, he gives this vague answer about target shooting cans. It just didn't quite sit right with her. It felt like a weak excuse.
Understandably increases the unease, but then the interaction goes from just awkward to something more like predatory surveillance. Later, she goes down to the river. One of the men sees her across the water. He calls out her name Anisha, which she realizes she must have shouted earlier, carelessly. And then, really creepily, he just takes out what looks like a disposable camera and snaps a picture of her right across the river, then turns and walks away.
Oh, that is That's a huge shift. That's not just sharing space anymore. It feels like an act of documentation, like marking a target. Her solitude is gone, and she now knows she's been specifically noticed, identified, and even photographed.
Exactly. She's no longer anonymous. She's a known quantity. So knowing they're aware of her, maybe even tracking her, she spends the evening hyper alert. And sure enough, after dark, as the rain starts up again, the final intrusion begins. She hears sounds outside the tent. Faint, uneven sounds like someone stepping carefully over wet ground. Footsteps, circling.
Now here's where Anisha's story diverges significantly from the child's or the teenager's response, because she was prepared. She understood the risks of camping alone in such a remote place. She was armed. She immediately grabs her handgun, unzips the tent flap, and steps out into the rain to face whatever's out there.
She confronts the intruder. It's one of the men from earlier. He's standing just a few yards away, and he's holding a small axe. This is that critical moment where preparedness meets active threat. Her having that weapon and being ready to use it completely dictates what happens next.
The standoff escalates. Anisha levels the gun. The intruder, she says, had this disturbing blank expression. And then he mumbles something truly chilling. Critical information. He says something like his friend, Ivan, had discouraged him from coming to find me, and then adds that he had to take care of Ivan.
Wow. Okay, that changes everything. This isn't just about robbery or a random scare tactic anymore. That mumbling suggests, well, maybe a serious psychological break. And the mention of Ivan, especially had to take care of, implies violence might have already happened, or maybe a crime is in progress right then. The level of danger just skyrockets. Anisha realizes she might be dealing with someone unstable who could have already committed a serious crime, maybe even murder.
Her response, her escape plan, it was textbook tactical thinking. She didn't freeze. She fires a warning shot not at him, but nearby, proud to break his focus, shock him out of that blank state. It works. She forces him to drop the axe. Then she makes him take off his shoes, smart move, makes pursuit much harder on rough, wet ground. Then she grabs his axe and some of his gear for good measure and just takes off, hiking quickly away through the rain and dark.
That combination, the readiness with the weapon, plus that clear tactical thinking under extreme stress, that was likely the difference between survival and something much worse. She didn't just neutralize the immediate threat, she actively impaired his ability to follow her. That's real presence of mind. And if we connect this back to the teenager's story, notice the similarity. In both the second and third accounts, it's the ambiguity of the violence that ramps up the terror. The random attacker in the street with no clear motive and this guy muttering about having to take care of Ivan was Ivan hurt, dead. That uncertainty makes it feel much worse than a straightforward confrontation.
So bringing these three intense stories together, what's the synthesis? What are the common threads, the really unforgettable lessons from these encounters under the cover of rain and isolation?
Well, what's really fascinating is how that shared environment, the heavy rain, the isolation, stripped away normal layers of security for everyone. We see a few common threads emerge. First, that sensory shift we talked about. The unusual cold, the sudden temperature drop, the strange sounds that cut through the storm noise. They act almost like subconscious alarms. Second, particularly in the adult stories, there's this ambiguity of intent, the lack of a clear, understandable motive for the attacks. That randomness itself is a huge part of the terror and, frankly, a lesson about assessing threats in the real world.
Right. And the third thing that stands out is the absolute necessity of quick, decisive thinking. The child hiding silently, the teenager making that split-second choice to run into the park, not home, and Anisha's immediate tactical response to disarm and escape. It shows survival often depends less on brute strength and more on strategy and instinct.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit more. What are the practical takeaways here? These accounts really highlight a spectrum of security needs. For the child, the lesson learned, maybe tragically late, was that basic measures like locking your doors need to be absolute, almost second nature. You check and double check. But for Anisha, the camper, the lesson is different. In truly isolated environments, preparation isn't paranoia. Being aware, being potentially armed if appropriate and trained, and having a plan for tactical retreat. That's vital risk management.
These deep dives into such personal, harrowing accounts, they really remind you just how fragile our sense of security can be, especially when the environment itself seems to turn against you. Thank you for joining us as we explored these stories and looked at the critical role instinct and preparation played in survival.
Yeah, and maybe consider this as you go about your week. How much do you really rely on your surroundings, your safe street, your locked front door for your sense of security? What happens if that environment fails you? What happens when your gut instinct screams one thing, but your logical brain hesitates? The provocative thought to maybe carry with you is, how prepared are you really to act in that split second when your safety depends entirely on your own strategic choice?